Hello.
Hi, Rachit.
Yeah. Am I audible?
Yes,
Okay.
quite a bunch.
Hello, everyone. Good evening. Um, my name is Rachit, and I'm joining all of you from a North Indian city called Meerut. And I would like to first of all welcome all of you, a heartfelt welcome to each one of you present here. Uh, Today we have gathered here to talk about, majorly to talk about two things. One is to really acknowledge the crisis that we are in as humankind, but also to honor an act of hope, an act of catharsis, and an act of self reconciliation that writing is. Before we dive into all these experiences and all these conversations, I would like to invite Medha, who is the program head of Writing Through Crisis, to throw some light on the inception and journey of Writing Through Crisis and how was it made possible. Uh, Medha, over to you.
Yes, thank you, Rachit. I'll be very brief, everybody, just so that we all have a context of what the program is about. Of course, we're all here for the launch of an anthology, but the anthology itself has been a culmination of a program called Writing Through Crisis, which was a 5-week writing workshop launched in partnership with HEART Hyderabad, which is the alumni association based out of the city, and Rubaru, of course, and was supported by the US Consulate here in Hyderabad. Uh, in the 5 weeks of the workshop, which was led by Aditi, who is also joining us, and you will hear her speak shortly. Um, we were also joined by we also had two guest sessions by Sarah Stuteville, who's a journalist and memoirist from Seattle, and Doug Peterson, who's an author based out of Chicago. Um, and this was a narrative therapy writing focused workshop, which where we were 24 participants. So we would meet twice every week. Um, Aditi would take us through a sessions, we do some writing, and at the end of the workshop, which happened between September to October, of course, all the participants then went back with a lot of with well a lot of discussions, but also insights into how they can shape the stories that they have in mind, which they did, and and that brings us very quickly here today, where we have been able to compile all of their writings. We've selected some, not all of them, and we've compiled them into an anthology, which we're very, very excited to launch today after we speak to our lovely panelists. So, Rachit, back to you.
Thank you so much, Medha. Uh, Thank you for taking us through the journey, sort of reliving the program days. Um, so, if we also just wanted to invite people, if you are comfortable in switching on your videos, it would just have like more faces, in the room. Thank you so much. Great. So I was thinking about the very title of the program, which is Writing Through Crisis, and these two ideas, writing and crisis. While if we look at them, they seem very distinct. While writing is elusive, abstract, almost a solitary pursuit, uh, the crisis is very much collective, very much real, very much devastating. Yet, if you look closely at writing and crisis, you'd see them intertwined. You'd see that they're almost entangled, and that's what we have been seeing. That wherever there is some despair, there's also joy. There's also hope. Whether we demonize it or whether we romanticize it, we cannot really ignore it. Uh, so, like we are going to get into more such conversations generally, but also we'd be talking a lot about writing as a process in particular. And to share experiences and stories, we have a brilliant panel of authors with us who are going to talk about various intricacies of writing, writing as a process and also writing as a passion. So, without much ado, I would like to introduce you to our wonderful panelists. So, please join me in welcoming our first panelist, Aditi Rao. Aditi is a poet, author, essayist, and also a potter. Aditi has written two full length books of poetry, The Fingers Remember and A Kind of Freedom Story. Her writings, her essays, poems have been published widely all over the world, and she's been recognized by several awards and fellowships. Aditi was also, as Medha mentioned, was an instructor at the program, Writing Through Crisis. And in the program, I remember especially her creative tools and not rules, as she used to say, have been quite a guiding light for a lot of us. Thank you so much, Aditi, for being here, and welcome back.
Thanks, Rajit.
A second panelist is Miss Pia Bakshi. Pia is a scriptwriter, a language coach, and a PhD scholar in English. Pia is also the author of the book Read Red, which some of us got the chance to read last week. She also runs a excuse me. She also runs a very interesting social organization called Philanthropy, which is a volunteer driven social organization committed to creating spaces, art spaces, which are inclusive and accessible by under resourced communities and marginalized communities. Thank you so much, Priya, for being here. It's a pleasure to have you here with us.
Thank you so much. It's wonderful to be here. Thank you so much.
A third panelist is Miss Manjul Bajaj. Manjul is an author of several remarkable books, including Come Before Evening Falls, Another Man's Wife, and Search of Heath. Many of her books have been shortlisted for various eminent literary prizes like Hindu Literary Prize, JCB Prize, and among others. Uh, Her latest work, which is Locked Down, which is a collection of poems, micro poems, has been an instant hit in a little group when it was shared by one of our facilitators, Annapurni. So we are so glad to have you, Ms. Manjul, here. Thank you so much for being with us. Great. So this was the introduction of panelists. Before we go into a space of dialogue where the panelists can also ask questions from the participants and also the participants can ask, whatever their questions of curiosity are. Uh, I would like to also kind of ask a few questions that I had from each panelist. And if I may, if Aditi is ready, I would like to begin with Aditi. Um, Aditi, since beyond poetry and literature, you're also inclined towards history and particularly oral histories.
Mhm.
My question to you is that the world has gone through such phases that we are kind of facing right now, the pandemic, whether it was in the form of Spanish flu before 100 years ago, or whether it was in the form of Black Plague in the 15th and 16th century. Also, in these times, it's also a coincidence that a great literature has been churned out by some writers, whether it's Shakespeare, Giovanni, or others. My question to you is, what, according to you, what role does literature or writing in particular play in these collective crises that the humanity faces?
Hmm. Um, well, I guess a pandemic is one of the kinds of crisis from which literature has come out, right? Like there's a lot of great war literature as well, for example. Um, and I think it's at multiple levels. I think you'll also find a lot of writers writing their way through personal crises, through like the death of a loved one or through illness or whatever else is happening in their own lives. I think I don't see it as separate or exceptional when it comes to collective crises as much as just because of the collective nature of the crisis, a whole sort of body of work emerging in response to it together. But I do like to think of it and remember it mostly as like individuals making sense of their experiences and their worlds and their feelings and their ideas. Because I think a lot of these things also get kind of collated or collected almost retrospectively. Like, for instance, the anthology that we're launching today is a coming together of the different individual experiences of each of the people in this room, right? So if we kind of overemphasize its collective nature, I think we can lose sight of the fact that, for instance, there are certain individual experiences represented here and others that are not. And yet, I think there's a way in which the more we're collecting those stories, the more we're listening in on those stories, the more we can kind of start seeing patterns, we can start seeing connections, we can start kind of a collective meaning making around what any one of these experiences has meant to a particular set of people in a particular crisis, in a particular moment in history. So I think it's a different, and you mentioned oral history, and the reason I got interested in oral history is because it moves away from this very zoomed out like statistics kind of version of history, and it lets us really focus in on like individual experiences, individual stories, and the ways in which they kind of tell a larger story, right? So through the pandemic, just the story of one person sitting at their window looking out tells a larger story, but it also is specific to that story in a way that I think is ultimately much more interesting, as far as understanding a historical moment goes, than, for instance, the statistics of like what have been the recovery rates. I think that doesn't tell you the real story of what's happening. So I think of it as primarily individuals making meaning, and then it goes on to sort of become a historical record. I don't think too many people are writing it thinking about writing history. I think people are writing it thinking about making meaning, and then the meaning that people make in that moment is what goes on to inform how we look back at it later, centuries later, decades later.
Thank you so much, Aditi. Yeah, it does really make sense. I mean, a personal story is as personal as it's universal. Yeah, thank you so much for your insights, Aditi. Uh, my next question is for Pia. Uh, Pia, you have very beautifully portrayed and explored the relationship of a writer and the character in your book, and you have left a rather interesting question in the book that says that the reader reads and the writer writes, but what happens to the characters? So my question, as a reader, I know that those characters stay on with me for years and decades, but I'm curious to know what happens to the relationship of the writer and the characters once the writer moves on from the book. What happens? How do these that relationship unfolds between the writer and the characters?
Thanks so much for your question, Rachit, and for the kind words. I think the premise of writing what I wrote was, in fact, to break these binaries that we put around identities. The whole idea that a writer is a writer, a reader is a reader, and a character is a character, because it's sort of more fluid than that. I am doing my PhD, so forgive me if I make any literary references, but I was just referring to a text by Max Saunders, which says that all text, anything that's written, is in fact autobiographical, because you cannot disengage any part of memory, yours or borrowed or implied. We're just talking about oral history and the component of memory being a part of historical record. One cannot delineate any part of a contribution from any part of the fluidity in its creation. So if you ask me what the relationship that a writer has with a character, what happens to that after the book culminates, I think it changes complexions. It just manifests in another character sometime later, or another book, or in a rereading of the same book that you write, which most authors abandon after it's done. In a lot of ways, I think the relationship sort of continues because it is a continuum. It is never. I mean, at least I think that the very act of writing abdicates the idea of closure, because it always leaves something unsaid, something which is unthought in a very Derridian sense, something which is unthought, which is not present in the text, but still in its absence, still present. So, in that continuum, I think the relationship is just a perpetual one, whether in its presence or in its absence.
Thank you so much, Pia. That's wonderfully put. And somewhere I had read that there's absolutely no fiction. All fiction is somebody's reality or somebody's story. Thank you so much. Uh, so my next question is for Ms. Manju Bajaj. Um, I really love how in your book, in your recent book, Lockdown, you have really offered a recipe, where there is there is experiences, there is a lot of emotions, there is also a splash of humor, there's a dash of sharpness, and you offer it in a way, you serve it in a way which is like very like tidbits of poems, micro poems. So my question to you is, first of all, what was the process, what was the experience that you had while going through this process of writing in the lockdown and about the lockdown? And my second question, it's a twofold question. The second part of the question is, what made you choose the format of micro poem writing, and not, like, say, long form narrative?
Okay, really, it is necessity is the mother of invention. That's what happened in my case. I'm usually a very self indulgent author. I spend months and years just researching and building the mood for my next work. And I tend to spend a lot of time on my writing. And what happened with the lockdown was that suddenly I was in the middle of writing these books and I couldn't. And there was this sense of huge desperation because all of life was being spent either cooking or just surviving, or because there was no help available and there was a whole family to feed and a whole house to keep clean. And the fact that I couldn't write at all was somehow hurtful to me. I felt here I am living through what must be the largest event of the last 100 years in terms of human society, and how sort of dramatically it has had to change its life from one night to the next, literally. So I actually started writing little dashes of thoughts on my smartphone while I was cooking. So I was standing and I would sometimes burn something, but mostly it was something that was about the level of ambition I could nurse at that time, that I can write a micro poem a day. And I somehow, it meant a lot to me that I hadn't stopped being a writer, that I was doing what I could through the pandemic. And I was also processing the emotions and the feeling. And a lot of what was happening to us was very unique uh, as a society, as a person. So it was a great pleasure to record it all, and to have this hope of a little book at the end of it, you know.
Thank you so much, Ms. Bajaj. Thank you. um, so that was from me. Now I would like to invite participants and friends, if they'd have any questions. They can either use the chat box to write them, or they can unmute themselves and, like, ask it directly to the panelists. The floor is yours.
Um, okay, Ms. Manjul, I did have this to ask. I did read your the micropoetry, the Lockdown collection, and I'm also reading In Search of Heath. And I think there is a very strong gender note to be in all of your writing. In fact, I've read Another Man's Wife also. So is that kind of planned, or is it just because of the kind of people we are? We are all products of our context and of our periods, and we all like to be feminists. So is that part of just who you are?
It's part of who I am. It's you can't be inhabiting a woman's body, or you can't be inhabiting a woman's social space without questioning it. I mean, everybody questions who they are and where their life situates them in the context of their writing, and that's what I do. I'm not mean, that's not the only question I ask of my writing, but it is definitely a very strong one, because these are issues which are coming back to us from centuries, and however modern or emancipated we consider ourselves to be, we are somehow repeating the patterns of our mothers and our grandmothers and our ancestors right from the cave days. So these are questions which are very interesting to me. And I write because I need to explore life. And one of the things that I really need to understand is the gender question and why we haven't been able to put it behind us fully.
Thank you very much. And like you rightly said, I know that you're exploring other stuff too. And I just attended an event in which Kamala Basan was was a guest, and she mentions how, along with feminism and gender, there's also caste and race and class, which kind of go together. And you explore each of these in some of your books. In Another Man's Wife, I know that these are explored.
And
So
for me,
thank you
a
for
very
that.
important thing is the environment as well, because our relationship with women is also echoed in our relationship with the environment. There are similar types of exploitation, of marginalization of other species as well, of the wild world. So that's another sort of thread in my writing, apart from issues of power and caste and class, also of what are we doing to the environment. And it, I think, emanates from the same place that patriarchy does, or capitalism does, or the need for power and wealth does. So that's another thread in my writing.
That actually surprisingly also, or unsurprisingly, also happens to be there also happens to be all of these issues that you talked about, caste and class and feminism, and in subtle ways, um, once we all get to read the anthology, we'll see that lot of the pieces in the anthology also touch upon almost all of these, all that we talked about just now. Do you think that youth today, in their writing or in their thoughts, I mean, they're impacted differently when it comes to these issues? And um, also, has the last 1 year specifically, since that's what the anthology also is trying to encapsulate through its writings, has that had like um, an additional or more of an impact in some way in the way that youth especially are thinking about these things, are paying attention to the environment that they're coming from when they write?
Medha, I think they're waiting for who you're asking the question to.
Right.
I mean, I'm sorry, I just really meant that as a follow-up question to Manjul, but of course we can all answer it. It's like it's an open question when all of us write. Even when we were thinking about the anthology, even though there was a very specific theme that we all sort of came with in mind, not just the pandemic, like Aditi said, crisis. I mean, pandemic was just one thing that happened this year. This year, so many other crises have happened, environmental and political, and we also discussed about a lot of these crises during our workshop. And so, yeah, my question is just how do you think that, youth is, do you think that this year has especially had some kind of an impact on the way that we're thinking and writing about these things? Is it this year? Has it been different when y'all started writing, and when you express yourselves in writing about these issues? Um, does that help you cope with a lot of what's happening around you?
Should I answer that?
Please.
I mean, youth is a time of great and very intense feelings, and I've no. I've sort of known a lot of people, a lot of youngsters who've had disturbances in their exam schedules, in their entrance exams. So I think for them also to process what happened, it's been a very remarkable and very upsetting year. So yes, I would imagine the writing through this is very important to sort of understand what you've been put through and understand how it has impacted you.
I can, Mitha, just add one part, which I think, in terms of what has changed, I mean, in many ways, we'll only know retrospectively what has changed in this year for the way people write about it. But I think one of the things, and that's true for everybody, but perhaps more true for young people, is the ways in which we access information has changed dramatically this year as all of our lives have moved entirely online. So, even I was thinking about, for instance, I live in Delhi, the difference between when the anti-CA protests were happening at the start of the year and the farmers' protests are happening now, in the ways in which one is able to, how comfortable is one in terms of showing up physically at a protest today to actually have a in-person direct sense of what's happening compared to relying on some news channels or some people who are posting through Instagram. So I think a lot of the shifts I imagine we'll actually be making sense of over time. There's a way in which, I think, collective thinking is changing. It's people are trying to do it online. I don't think it's quite the same as when you kind of sit together in a group till 3 a.m. brainstorming something. I don't think there's a clear online equivalent of it yet. So I do think that some of the actual effects, like how it changes the way we think, which is obviously part of the way we write, we might only know over time. But I think that that's probably, for me and for a lot of young people I work with, that's probably the most dramatic shift that's happened, is just in the ways in which we access information right now, or share information for that matter. And therefore, the ways in which our thinking has often become much more individualized, just because you're not sort of in the presence of others in the same way. You're not so much in a first person way going there, seeing what's happening on the ground. You're a little more removed in a lot of ways. And I think that's definitely shifting how we're understanding what's happening around us.
If I may just add to that, that's all right. I was just thinking of, how crisis in general is perceived. A moment like this, it either perhaps brings one to one's individual reality, gives one the time to, or the shock, in fact, to assimilate what one is experiencing. Also, I think it makes one humble down and experience the collective associated with the individual to some extent. So it is this dual participation in one's immediate world that sort of complicates thought, but it is this complication that sort of lends some merit to it. It merits some effort in figuring out what one is thinking. And I think to that effect, at least the quest for information, the quest for just making sense of the world, even before one attempts to make meaning of it, is something that really led to how we are contributing to the discourse around crisis and how that affects us individually and collectively.
Thank you so very much. I also have a question, and a very personal question, that I would like to ask all three of you. I would love to hear your views on that. I think one thing that I experienced during the pandemic, and have been experiencing in writing in general, is that there are certain things, like while this whole crisis was unfolding, there was a lot of destruction and devastation, but there was also a lot of regeneration. There was a lot of things which were, like, for example, the nature, the environment. A lot of structures were crumbling, like a lot of really stoic structures. And I have, while in my experience of writing, I felt uh, a little confused as to where do I really kind of pose my attention, because at times it just, because also the kind of connotations which are given if you pursue, if you pursue some romantic writing, so I mean there's a lot of self judgment that comes in, that kicks in when a young person is just like really very genuinely attracted to the beauty of the world, even though there is a lot of crisis and even though there is a lot of destruction, like not discounting that, but also pointing out at the beauty. So like what are your experiences in that, like in that whole dilemma of should I, like be attentive to beauty, or should I be attentive to the crisis?
Should I go first? See, there was a poem I wrote for the lockdown, which I think ended with the same sentiment. I'm confused. Is the world rising down or is it falling up? Because there's so many conflicting things which were happening. There were birds all around us, and there were peacocks walking down my colony streets, and images of nature on resurgence. And I was just sort of doing balle balle, imagining all the number of mineral water bottles which were not being thrown. And so there was almost a Stockholm syndrome. I was in love with the pandemic in the first, and the lockdown in the first few weeks, because it seemed to be saving us from the worst of our excesses. And that confusion has sort of lingered in my head. But then as time goes on and you're hit by grief or personal loss, you understand that it's not that simple. And then you see other people suffering, and there was the whole migrant issue. So the confusion is very real. But I don't think at any point you should question the love or appreciation of beauty, because that's what we're alive for. This has given us a great chance to reconsider what we find beautiful and what in our lives is ugly, and how we can change our choices and move to something that is more beautiful. And this overnight stopping of everything, schools, colleges, transport, flights, everything just comes to a halt. And it's a huge opportunity to actually question the lies we've been telling ourselves, that this can't be stopped, we can't save the world, that it's inevitable that we live the lifestyles we live, because faced with a tiny virus, you're stopped dead in your tracks. So I think this is a huge opportunity at the level of the individual and at the level of the society to redefine our ambitions, to redefine our relationship with ambition. You think you have to get to that college, you think you have to get that job, and suddenly nothing's happening. There are no buses, there's no metro, there's no going out of your house. So what is it that you actually have to get, and what can you dispense with?
If I may, I was just thinking of what you said, Rachit, and I was thinking if it's just a matter of switching the conjunction that we use, am I to look at this or am I to look at this? And if we can replace the or with an and, I think it's about being a pan observer. Like, it doesn't mean that if you're taking in the beauty that you're ignoring the struggle, the absolute pain that comes with the situation that we're all in. And of course, we are speaking from a space of privilege. We're not even venturing into the trajectory of those who may not even be able to talk about things the way we are talking about them today. Yeah, so I was just thinking, if it's, if we actually have to peg ourselves in those binaries, if I'm writing a romance story or a novella to that extent, does that mean I'm ignoring the struggle of the other? Or am I being cognizant of it while I'm writing it? And I think it's more about the combination, the awareness of the duality that I think makes for a keen observation, the circumstances that we are in.
Yeah, I completely agree with both of those. And all that I'd add is, again, I think that the answer to that question will change from moment to moment and person to person. And it's not like, because today I'm writing about beauty, I may never write about crisis, or because today I'm writing about crisis, I may never write about beauty. I think we need to also stay true to what we need to write about. That said, I think even that binary of, I think I mentioned this in the workshop or to some of you individually anyway. One of my most interesting experiences during the pandemic was I was teaching an online workshop for a group of women with disabilities, all types of disabilities from across South Asia. And it was a workshop we'd been trying to do for a year and had not been able to because of access needs, because of people not being not being able to find wheelchair accessible venues, various things like that. And it was really interesting how in this moment suddenly that became possible. And as I got to know some of the women in that workshop, it became interesting how one of them told me that for the first time in her life she had a full-time job, because she can't leave her room. She has a serious muscular dystrophy, and for the first time in her life people were like, oh yeah, you could work from home. And she was saying, and a lot of the women I met in that context were saying how this is something that the disability movement has been demanding for decades, at least for the last 2 decades, saying that, hey, it's not that hard anymore. Kind of to Manjul's point about the things that we hadn't imagined and the things that we said, oh, this takes too much of a financial investment. This takes too much of a technology investment. We can't make it happen. So sorry. And suddenly everybody is doing it. And I think in that sense, any one of those moments, like, is that crisis, is that beauty, I don't know, right? But in any one of those moments there are all these different possibilities, right, that it opens up. And I don't think it's ever a mistake to focus on that possibility. I don't think focusing on the possibility is erasing the fact that there are other people, for instance, who have lost jobs in the pandemic, right? So it's not either or, but at the same time, what's interesting to me, not just as a writer, but as a person, is just like, what are the ways people take that moment and how does it reveal itself differently in the lives of different people? I was asked earlier this week for a magazine that wanted to do these. They asked me to give them a commissioned poem on the theme of hope. They're doing an end of year issue on hope. And it was just very interesting to be like, how do you, in this moment, in this year, sit down to say, well, I need to write about hope, right? And then pretty much within a day, I was like, okay, right now, my hope I find in the farmers' protests, in the kind of solidarity that I'm seeing. My goddaughter was born on the 1st of December. I, I can't write her a poem about how the world is functioning beautifully, but I can write her a poem about, in the midst of this crisis, when everything feels so unsteady, here's a place that I'm turning to in order to find hope. It's a hope that's very aware of crisis and yet is also very beautiful in its own space. So I don't think there's any situation that's only crisis or only beauty. I think they always kind of intermingle with each other.
Thank you so much. This was quite insightful. Any more questions from any participants? Sure.
Hi, everyone. Uh, I just had a small question. Since we've discussed a lot about privilege, we've discussed a lot about how this pandemic has taught us a lot of things. But I think some things remain constant, which is that each of us uh, has our own individual style of revisiting our work. So I would love to know from each of you as to how, what are your processes when you've written a piece and you want to revisit it after some point of time to just gain a fresh perspective. So how do you go about it? Like some people, they say they keep it aside for some time, or they have their own process. So would love to know what are your processes in that sense. Yeah, thank you.
Okay, I'll take that then. I really just leave things aside for a very long time and come back and look at them with a fresh eye, because when I'm writing, I get very sort of seduced by my own writing voice. It all sounds very melodious and beautiful to the extent that I don't even see typos. So the only way to gain objectivity, I think, is to leave it for long enough that you can read it as a stranger, or if so, that's what I do. I leave it, and sometimes, of course, you can ask other people to read it for you, but that's you have to respect their opinion. Then you have to respect it enough to know that they'll tell you exactly how it is.
I often separate writing with episodic reading. I feel that really
It
helps because
also works.
it's a good break from being self indulgent in one's own voice. It helps to hear other voices, writer personas, and then maybe after a month or two, revisiting something that was written. I'm still finding I don't have a writer voice that I can peg down to right now at all. But it could be a culmination of all these little books and excerpts that, have sort of come to inform this congregate of one for me right now. So, yeah, I think I pause it with a lot of reading, definitely.
My process would be similar to what Manjul talked about, where I do tend to leave things be. I also revisit them multiple times. So it's not like there's one draft and then I revisit it and then it's done. I will do 10, 12 drafts of things before they go out. My minimum is 3 drafts before something goes out into the world, but I've done up to like 13 drafts. So I think it's also about like allowing yourself to like revise is like to revision, right? To look at it again with new eyes, not kind of, I feel like sometimes we talked about this in the workshop, sometimes we get stuck in like, oh, but originally I intended to say this. And I think being open to the fact that I might realize a week later that what I originally intended to say was not all that interesting, and I have something more interesting to say now. And but I needed to say the less interesting thing to be able to now get to the more interesting thing. So not to get like overly invested in like, oh, but this was the first outpouring that was true, and just like, okay, this was one set of things, and then I might stick with it or I might change my mind. Like giving oneself that freedom that one gives oneself in everyday life.
Thank you. Do we have any other questions from the participants? I would also like to know from the panelists, I'm not sure if you've had the chance to read the anthology yet, uh, but if there are any questions that you'd like to ask the participants, or something that you're looking forward to reading in the anthology, would love to ask that, like, to all three of you.
I'd love it if somebody would like to read an excerpt of their piece, since this is the launch of the anthology. Let's maybe hear a bit of the anthology. If there's any volunteers to read out like a short piece or a section of it, I'd love to hear some of that.
Totally, that's a lovely idea. Anybody?
Rachit, maybe do you want to read out one of your pieces?
Okay. I might have to look for it. If anybody has it handy, that'd be great.
I could read mine.
Sure, please.
Mine is a poem called Different Alones. Okay, 1 second. Am I audible?
Yes.
Perfect. I know we have different alones. Mine is sticky, saccharine in ways. I let go of my responsibility and let myself appear lazy for days. Someone once told me that lazy is a lazy word. I laughed. Lazy tells us that someone is not doing something. Lazy asks us to assume that it's because of their nature. Lazy doesn't leave room for the why of. I've been called lazy so many times that I've started to believe it. I did not know I could ask why. Why? Why did I struggle so much where others seem to know what to do and even followed through? I have to admit that the pandemic wasn't that hard on me. What was a lockdown when I'd spent half the year homebound? We have spent a lot of time being alone, and I don't want to say that it helped, to know that the whole world was isolating like me, but it did. I got to see how inventive people could be in their alones, how present in their conversations and creations, how funny in these dire circumstances across our different natures and nations. Somehow seeing these different alones helped me get more comfortable with mine. That's it.
Thank you, Jasmine.
Thanks.
Thanks, Jasmine. That was lovely.
Thank you.
Thank you, Jasmine. Is anybody else would like to share theirs?
I have mine open.
Sure.
Yeah. So one of the workshop sessions was on windows. A window outside, a window, a window from your house that you could look at the pandemic from. So I decided to I had written about my living room window a year ago, and that poem for some reason was filled with hope. Around the same time, it looked everything outside the window looked really pretty, really beautiful. But in the pandemic, for some reason, everything was physically more beautiful, but so quiet and so desolate. It left more loneliness in my heart than anything else would have. That beauty left loneliness in my heart in a way. So I decided to rework that poem just a little bit with the concept of the pandemic. So it's called June, and here it goes. Window for the longest summer, leaves outside dying quietly. All year long, the hairs on my arms hated the street sounds. But tonight, with the moon so dark and the heart so quiet, and you so far away, I call for the wind to blow city sounds into the street again. Stray beams of sun through the lonely peepal tree, dust kissing its edges, hope balanced on its bosom. I'll sleep tonight with unease between my ribs, sickness between these doors, silence around these windows. Sounds from the kitchen scream for mercy, for release, for life to leave them alone again. Sounds from my mother's phone speak of death, of longing, of goodbyes. In time, I look for life in my chest again, rumbling like the crazy people outside, people and their machines. The quiet in my chest miss the crazy, love on my fingertips. The quiet in my chest miss solitude. That's it.
Thank you, Jasmine and Javera. I just wanted to point out that one of our panelists, Pia, has, since she is into a very pursuing her PhD and studying a lot right now, she is going to have to leave us. So, if any of you have any questions for her, now is the time to ask before she leaves.
So, can I go ahead? Yeah, so in the beginning, I heard that you, when
Did it freeze just for me? No.
No.
For everyone.
Any other questions also, or maybe I can have Rakshita connect with you later, Pia, but
Yeah, that's great. You have my
I
mail,
know that.
my number, everything. I'm very happy to have a conversation. Thank you. It was lovely to be here with such wonderful people. Thank you. Absolutely wonderful experience, and all the very best for the anthology. I can't wait to read the whole of it.
Thank you so much,
We'll be
Pia.
waiting to hear your thoughts on it.
And thank you, Medha. Thanks for facilitating this, Rachit and Medha. It was lovely. Thank you. And to the panelists, thank you for having me here as well. It's an honor to be with the two of you. So thank you.
Yeah, good luck.
Thank you.
Any questions from anybody? Maybe last one or two questions. Then we shall move on to release the anthology. I just had like a very sort of quick question from both the authors. and it just kind of came to my mind when I was reading about what Pia had written, in her book about characters and how they impact how you really form a relationship with characters. I was curious to know if there is any character that you go back to, to find strength and resilience. Any book or any character that you go back to over and over again whenever you feel lost, or to find some hope and also strength.
So for me, there used to be, but it's not a character I go back to anymore. When I was like through college and a little bit beyond that, I used to go back to the character of Jane Eyre, or the book. That was one of my sort of go-to places. It's not anymore. And I think that had to do with rereading it from different lenses later, particularly a book that somebody else wrote, Jean Rice wrote, which kind of reimagines Jane Eyre in the context of race that complicated it. I think now possibly a book that I do go back to quite often it's called The Tree House, and it's by Naomi Wolf, who otherwise most of her writing is feminist writing, political writing. But this is a memoir about her relationship with her father. And her father was a poet and a teacher, and she kind of talks about how she'd resisted learning from him, as we all resist learning from our parents forever. And then towards the end of his life, takes on this project of building a tree house for her daughter with him. And the things that he kind of teaches her along the way about how to be in the world, starting from his poetry, but kind of going beyond that. I mean, it's a memoir, but to the extent that her father is a character in that memoir, that's probably the closest I have to that now. Not so much because I find like resilience in it, but it's just like there's something very comforting about that read for me. So I go back to it sometimes.
Thank you, Aditi.
That sounds fascinating. It's a book I'm going to put on my TBR. For me, I think it would be Alice in Wonderland and Through the Looking Glass. I keep lapsing into Alice's character very often. Every time I can't make sense of the world, I decide to, I don't decide, I remember a line or something out of Alice, which puts things in perspective for me. So it's like always being able to detach yourself from the world and see the craziness of it. So that's the book I sort of, I don't so much reread it anymore. I just remember parts of it and laugh at them and sort of, connect them with the craziness of the world around us. So Alice gives me a lot of perspective, and I like that sort of, this is something psychedelic about her experience, something about, it would sort of, I don't know how to put it, but it shows you the humor in every situation. It shows you the world through a lens of funny, of peculiar, of it's all right, sort of.
Thank you so much, Ms. Bajaj. I think that might be true for a lot of us. Okay, great. I mean, after this whole session, after listening to our panelists, I'm definitely feeling a lot more sort of expanded in my mind and in my heart. And also very subtly, not that they have kind of really sort of particularly talked about the process, but very subtly and in a very nuanced way, I could also learn a lot, like what happens in that whole process of writing, in that whole experience of writing. So thank you so much to both of you for being
Thank you
here.
for having us. It's a great pleasure, and all the best with the anthology.
Thank you. Thank you very much. We also have with us here Mr. David Moyer, who's the Public Affairs Officer, U.S. Consulate Hyderabad. And I would like to invite him to say a few words about the relevance of the Writing Through Crisis program for young people, but also his engagement and his experience with the program. Mr. David Moyer, if you're ready.
Thank you. Good evening, everyone. I'm very happy to be part of this closing event of of this Writing Through Crisis workshop. So some time ago, about June of this year, the U.S. mission here in India began supporting programs that provided innovative responses to challenges caused by the COVID-19 pandemic. And we received a number of proposals from various organizations, and we're happy to support some of these of the better conceived projects. Among them was this one, Writing Through Crisis grant, that we were here at the U.S. Consulate in Hyderabad were able to support. Personal and professional crises, unexpected developments in life, trauma induced by the loss of a dear one, or the stress caused by a pandemic like this one that we are facing today. These things can derail our lives, both emotionally and mentally, and affects people of all ages, especially youth. However, scientific research over the years has established that writing, expressive writing in particular, can help some people cope with the tumult caused by emotional upheavals in life. So writing has several advantages. In the times of lockdowns and quarantines, it allows you to talk to and debate with yourself before you share your thoughts with others. So no mediator is required, and it's cheap. You just need a pen and paper, or maybe even just a tablet or computer. And if you're the type who uses the dictation feature, you don't even need a keyboard. Most importantly, it allows you time to think as you bring your thoughts together. By the time your thoughts turn into words, it no longer remains a reaction to an impulse, but rather a well-informed response to an emotion. So in short, it's a great outlet. And as I can see from some of the pieces that I've looked through on the anthology you all have written, the Writing Through Crisis workshop has been extremely engaging and meaningful in encouraging participants to respond to the pandemic through their writing. And just a personal note, I have two brothers who are authors. One has written some fiction, and the other one writes nonfiction. And I'm just amazed at how much talent it takes to be a good writer. And more importantly, as I look through some of the works that you have all submitted on the anthology, a lot of these are very personal emotions and things that you're capturing in print. And so I'm grateful to you for your willingness to share something so personal with a broader audience. And I think that's all part of the process we're going through. So congratulations. And before I release the anthology of your works, I would like to put in a plug for another very interesting project that the U.S. Embassy has supported in recent months. It's called Priya's Mask. And Priya was conceived as India's first female comic book superhero after the ghastly Delhi rape incident of 2012. In 2020, Priya has made a comeback, this time with a mask, battling the pandemic and the disinformation that surrounds it. So if you get a minute, search for Priya's Mask or go to www.priyashakti.com. And the comic books are also available in Telugu. And finally, I would like to thank Monisha and Neha from Rubaru for partnering with us in this creative writing initiative. And a big round of applause for Meda and Annapurni for conceiving and shepherding this entire project from beginning to end. The anthology is now available for you all to read at the HEART Hyderabad website. The link is available in the chat window below. Thank you all again and wish you all the very best for your future.
Thank you so much. Thank you very much.
I have shared the link for the anthology on the chat, and y'all can all access here. You can read it here, or you can also register and download a copy for yourselves. Once you're done reading, we would love to hear all your thoughts on the anthology. So there's an email also that has been provided over there. So please do write to us. Before we leave, though, we were wondering if we can take a very quick photo with all the participants and, of course, our panelists. Does everybody have their certificates? Maybe we can take a picture with your certificates. Or it's okay. I think we can take, for whoever has it handy, maybe we can take a snap with the certificates. Yeah? Isha, you on? Okay. Are you taking the snap? All right. You might want to switch it to gallery view. All right. Well, we're just towards the end of our program now, and I would really like to take this opportunity to thank a lot of people who've been a huge support in making this program a reality. US Consulate, of course. Thank you so much, David Salil, for guiding us throughout the process, for being so supportive and encouraging about the program. Neha and Monisha, like David has already mentioned, Ruburu has been just fantastic. And finally, of course, our panelists. Pia isn't here anymore, but I will, of course, Aditi and Manjul, thank you so much for having joined us. The participants, of course, Aditi will probably want to connect with you a little more once you've read their writings. So that, of course, we can take forward. You can all also follow Manjul Bajaj on Instagram. And I'm sure, ma'am, we would love to get a quote from you as well once you've read the anthology. So please do let us know what you think of it. Thank you for joining us and spending your evening with us today. Thank you all.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.